Ralph Breaks the Internet is a film that, just like anything else across the internet, has had quite the roller coaster of a reputation. When it first came out, it was considered a big hit with critics, audiences, the box office, and even Oscar nominations. Not wins, thank God, but nominations. Some, and by some I mean the nostalgia critic, didn't have the nicest things to say about the film, but it wasn't until a certain crabby YouTuber deemed the film as a cinematic disaster that the internet, in classic YouTube, Twitter X, who the heck even remembers MySpace fashion, demolished the film like Ralph to a building himself. How could such a film gain such a reputation? How could a film go from being appreciated by the masses to being torn apart like nobody's business by the internet? After all, not everything in the film is disastrous as those that have bashed it have made it out to be. The animation is gorgeous, especially given the turnaround, showing just how much animation has evolved over the years. The internet world is creative, certainly doing its homework and crossing its T's and dotting its I's much better than the Emoji Movie, and of course, as everyone's pointed out, this scene in Disney's hub is easily the most hilarious part of the film, showing that Disney does have a sense of humor and is capable of not only satirizing itself, but also satirizing itself as if someone else is satirizing them. That's hilariously humble of them. With that said, yeah, there's a lot, and I do mean a lot, of problems as well, mostly with its screenplay, which feels so half-baked and disjointed that it actually makes the film kind of feel like a big-budget straight-to-DVD sequel. It doesn't at all feel like a natural continuation of the first film. I mean, what, we go from video games to the internet? Why would that even be in the same hub? One of the first lines in the opening is Vanellope talking about how she's tired of Sugar Rush and wants to try something new and challenging. Where did that come from? We go from the struggles of going turbo from game to game in your own arcade to suddenly going turbo through the internet? And yes, even merely as a part-time YouTuber, I can agree that Ralph becomes an internet celebrity way too fast and way too easily. Comments are far from the worst thing on YouTube. Even when I first saw the film in theaters, even though I was veering more so toward the side of critics, probably just because of peer pressure, I could tell something was off, and looking back at the film with my newfound perspective of having my own perspective on things, I was curious as to what side I was going to be on here. I couldn't argue with the internet's criticisms, but I knew there had to be something that critics and audiences at least somewhat appreciated with it, and believe it or not, there was actually one thing that tipped the scales barely towards the positive side for me. Just barely. In the first Wreck-It Ralph, Ralph's struggles centered mostly around whether or not he felt good about himself, hinging entirely on the perspectives that others had of him. He was feared and discriminated against while heroes like Felix were celebrated, and so just to gain a sense of appreciation, he left his game to try to become a hero. When he went to Sugar Rush and started interacting with Vanellope, he realized that his skills and his personality could be appreciated. He was strong, he was fast, and he was capable of a lot more than he realized. He could build, he could defend, he could be of genuine help to a lot of situations that he could come across. Through the adventure they go on together, she helped him see a side of himself that no one else, even himself, could see. The friendship and chemistry was the North Star that guided him through his journey to hold a better perspective of himself. Ralph Breaks the Internet doesn't very naturally put Ralph and Vanellope together, but when you see them interact with each other, you're kinda glad they did. If the film was just either Ralph or Vanellope, it probably would have been boring. Either Ralph would have just been an unguided doofus throughout the whole thing, or Vanellope would have just made quips at everybody. But in spite of the rest of the film essentially sinking, these two bouncing off each other with their quips and also looking out for each other is what barely keeps the film above water. Look at this scene, for instance, where Ralph and Vanellope go to eBay to get the steering wheel they need to save Sugar Rush. On paper, this sounds like a pretty lame joke. They think it's a game where you say the highest number possible, and they say a ridiculously high number which scares off the other bidders, not realizing that they're paying what most people would pay for a car for a steering wheel. And again, if it was just Ralph or Vanellope doing this, it wouldn't work at all, as they would just be being stupid by themselves. But the fact that they're not only gleefully unaware of what they're doing, but they're also gleefully naive together, is what makes the scene at least a little bit absorbing. When you make a mistake by yourself and everyone else laughs at you for it, you feel embarrassed. But when you and your friends make a mistake and neither of you are aware of what's going on, especially when you're having so much fun doing it in such an over-the-top fashion, it feels more free-spirited and gleeful. That's basically in a nutshell how the film comes together as a whole for me. While the scenes where Ralph or Vanellope are by themselves are an occasional hit, but mostly misses, the scenes where they're together are what helps the film work even when everything around them is falling apart, both narratively and emotionally. These scenes where Ralph is trying to course-correct Vanellope back on the journey they were on should feel contrived, but especially from the lesson he learned from the first film about appreciating where you are and where you're meant to be, you understand at least where he's coming from. These scenes where Vanellope struggles to tell Ralph about her fascination with Slaughter Race and how she wants to change things up should feel forced, but because you understand their bond, it instead feels natural. This scene where Ralph and Vanellope essentially break up should have killed the movie, and really should have been the part where everything fell apart and should have been the most contrived part of the movie. But because you understand their bond and that Ralph never meant to hurt Vanellope in any way, but that he was still in the wrong, it's genuinely heartbreaking because neither neither side is right or wrong here. You want them to maintain their friendship, but it also feels natural for both of them to have their emotional moments and spend some time apart until the climax where you know they're going to reconcile. And even that is played out pretty naturally. The film, when you count all its parts, is uneven and messy, but because of these two and the way that they bounce off each other in a sincere and amusing way, I still had fun with it. Not to say that the film simply having Ralph and Vanellope together is what makes the film work. Them still having this quippy, enjoyable on-screen chemistry that they have is what makes the film work. Maybe not 88% on Rotten Tomatoes work, but also not cinematic disaster not work. Even reducing the scope to Walt Disney Animation's legacy, I've seen films from them that have been both narratively messy and, putting it nicely, unpleasant on the entertainment scale. Films that had disastrous narratives as well as boring and or unlikable characters or a deprivation of any amusement. Ralph Breaks the Internet is just as messy and half-baked as those films. Well, okay, maybe not as much, but seeing these two interact with each other and make jokes at each other and carry out the mess of the plot that they're up against makes it less like rummaging through the garbage and more like having s'mores with friends around the campfire. Also a hot mess, but at least a sugar-coated mess that you can have with good friends. That's the charm that helps Ralph Breaks the Internet carry itself through to the end. The kind of charm where, even though it could be better and has been much better in the past, you at least get good laughs with some old friends, which again is way more than I or any audiences have been getting from Disney as of late. I won't go over the moon to defend the film, and if they're going to continue to put out sequels, which yeah, that seems to be the case, they do need to put more time and effort into polishing their screenplays. But to call it a cinematic disaster is just over the top and doesn't really give credit where credit's due. I think most people have just been expecting the seeds of greatness that were planted in the first movie to grow into something great, which who could blame them? I mean, the first film is much better. But for me, the bond between these two has yet to lose its luster. And while that's not what I, nor I suppose anyone else, would call a high score, it's at least enough for me to pick up the controller on it every once in a while.